Greetings! It is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, 5th Ed D&D. Now we started talking about creating your own encounters last time. We're diving deeper into that. So first let's talk about adding a little bit of excitement and altering your encounters just a little bit. Now the fact is, you can easily change the situation in your encounters by adding changes in location or changes in the situation, especially when it comes to affecting your players. If you want to make things a little more difficult using a location or situation with your players, then you can do that. It's going to increase the encounter level by 1. In the same retrospect, if you give a little advantage to your players, again, whether based on location or situation, then you can reduce the encounter level by 1. If you do this for both sides of the encounter, which you can do, you can have this effects hit each side. Your players could remain the same, and you can give advantage to your other opponents, or you could give a disadvantage to the opponents. These remain the same. They'll have the exact same effect. If you do the same thing to both sides, no change whatsoever. Or if we're going back to the players, and I give them both an advantage and a disadvantage, also there will be no change. So you can see how you can do things to affect the actual overall encounter, which could definitely add excitement, and they may or may not change the encounter level. Again, you're going to have to sort of balance everything out to a certain degree. You're going to want it to really only go up by 1, down by 1 overall. But again, if it's affecting everyone, no change whatsoever. You just don't know if it's going to hurt your players more than it's going to hurt your villains. Now, there are lots of things you can do, especially when it comes to locations and interesting situations that do add that fun and excitement. You could set up a situation, and this is especially when we're talking about things that are affecting the entire group. Both villains, both heroes, both sides. Both sides are getting hit by this. It could be a location where there's perilous hazards they have to avoid, or where they have to keep moving around. See, these are examples of situations where it's adding excitement to what's going on, and it's hindering both sides, so we're not changing the difficulty overall. We're only meant to add a little bit of suspense, to have your characters trying to think on the fly about what's going on and react to the overall situation kind of quickly and efficiently, and see what's going on. Fill them with some excitement. Now, as your players, explore the wilderness, explore dungeons. At some point in time, they're going to run into an encounter. And many times, this forms the situation of what is called a random encounter. When you roll dice for a table to figure out what if they're basically going to encounter something and what they're going to encounter. So this is completely random what it's going to be. The thing about this is, there seems to be this almost collective agreement between both DMs and players, more often than not, that random encounters are a bane and a distraction, and they suck. People just don't like using them. This doesn't have to be true. Granted, you can make the collective choice not to use random encounters. You can choose not to use them. They could be provided for you, or you could just not build them into your adventure. But today I'm going to start talking about how you can use them intelligently to add to your game rather than detracting it, to make these encounters make sense within your game and add to the overall levels of excitement without hurting it. Now, there are a couple of reasons why you would use these that make sense. First off, you can have it create tension in an area. If your players are hanging around an area for large periods of time and they begin to encounter enemies, it's telling them, maybe we shouldn't hang around this area. Maybe we should head on to the next area. You can help create the atmosphere with these. Also, if you're a certain type of atmosphere or theme you're establishing and a creature that match it, then yeah, it makes sense to throw it in there. Also, they can help drain your team of resources and hit points. Make it harder for them to encounter the next level of battle. Maybe the one you planned out, you think them at full strength. They're just going to kick butt. But you want them a little weakened, so it's much more of a challenge. That's where the random encounter comes in, to like drain a little bit of those resources. So when they hit that one you really want them to do, they're in a position that makes it much more of a tight on the edge encounter. You see the reasoning behind it there. Now, some of these encounters don't need to just be with monsters. They can still help or hinder or harm your quest overall. But let's say you're greeting some kind of NPC. You could end up in a fight with them, or you could glean least useful information or maybe even help from them. And you see how this encounter is evolving into something that might assist you overall in the adventure. Or maybe if you didn't have them, maybe because you were jerks and got in a fight with them, you're hurting yourselves because you didn't get that resource. You could also establish the world you're in. If you're building some kind of world all on your own and you wanted to make it feel alive, this encounter might fit within the purview of what's going on in the world and help feel like it's real. Final thing that's really a great suggestion for this is if you're creating some kind of theme for the region you're playing in. A good example is this: if two sides are warring and you get into an encounter where the two of them are having a battle, guess what? You're now in the middle of a battle. You can see firsthand a war is going on, and maybe both sides are including you because neither side knows whose side you're really on, and you just walked into the middle of it. There you go. Perfect encounter for them. The thing about these encounters is, as I said earlier, they are completely optional. There are plenty of DMs out there that don't like using random encounters, and you don't need to. You don't. The point of a random encounter is not to distract from the game. It's to add to the game. And if you don't think the encounters are going to add to the game, then don't use them. You're not being forced to. You never are being forced to. What you're doing is being given suggestions to help add to it. And the point is to use them to add to the story. Now, because when you're adding these in, you're not attempting to distract from the overall story. You have to find these perfect time periods to add in random encounters. They have to seem to fit along with the plot without interfering or harming it. The point is, your overall story you're building shouldn't be harmed by this random encounter. It could be things like your players are acting too carefully, they're getting off track. Maybe during a rest period might be a great time to put one in. Maybe if they're messing around in a location without progressing, hanging around too long. Or, on the other hand, if they're supposed to be basically keeping a low profile and they don't, well then, it might be a good idea to add in random encounters then. Once you've decided the perfect area that's not going to interfere with anything and it's not too spread out, you have to find that sort of middle ground, the perfect location for it. Not hurting everything, but not being totally innocuous. That's what it is. Not interfering, and it has to make sense. Right in the middle there. Once you've found that time, now you have to determine if you're having an encounter or not, because you're going to check over a period of time when this overall time period occurs, if the encounter occurs. This can be every hour, every 4 hours, every 8 hours, every day, or even every long rest. You roll a d20. If you roll 18 or higher, guess what? Your people have had a random encounter. So you can see here, even if you decide to use them, there isn't a huge chance of a random encounter occurring. There is that chance there, but it's not a guarantee. Once it occurs, though, then you roll based upon the random encounter table. This table will either have been provided if you're using an adventure that's already established or some kind of material that was already established. Traditionally, it's going to have a table that you can look right there. It'll tell you what to roll to figure it out. You can also build your own table. I'm going to be talking about that in the upcoming weeks, but just know that you can build your own random encounter table with all the encounters you think would be appropriate to your game, and now they're having one. Roll it. Hey, it's this one that I designed. That one's coming about. All of the encounters should either be obstacles or events which either themselves add to the plot of the game or add foreshadowing. If either of these are the reason why you're having this encounter, then guess what? It's a good reason to have that encounter. So that's it for today. I introduced you to, of course, modifying your encounters to either make them a little harder or difficult for your players. Granted, I talked about all the variations you can have on that, and all round modifying the encounter overall just to make it more interesting. Then I dived into the basics of random encounters. I talked about the fact that there's a negative stigma to random encounters, that many folks don't even use them. I, for one, have been known to avoid using them because of this very stigma. But if you feel like you can add them in and make it appropriate to the adventure, I talked about what was appropriate, then do it. Because it could add a level of something. It can fill up those little empty spaces, add a little tension, add a little bit of oomph to what's going on, a little bit of essence to the landscape that's being explored, just to add a little bit more to the adventure overall. And that's the point of a random encounter, to add to it, not to distract. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about, of course, building your random encounter table and about your design of those encounters in general. Before we're going to hopefully move in to start talking about NPCs, the non-player characters that are going to populate your world and that your players are going to be constantly interacting with. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you would say, anything you think I left out, please leave them in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's just for the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.